Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes renting fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Straight Shift. A client of mine who has been driving a Prius for the last 15 years, I'm not judging, is looking to buy a new hybrid. And he emailed me over the weekend about a proposed new legislation in North Carolina that would significantly increase the registration fees on hybrid and electric cars. So naturally, he was freaking out. He was appalled. He was ticked off about it. And he kind of wanted to know what the deal was with this. In short, it's called the Prius Tax, and you don't have to have a Prius for it to affect you. It's related to our crumbling road infrastructure in the U.S. that is paid for in large part by the tax on gasoline. In a nutshell, state and federal budgets that go to paying for repairs and maintenance and expansion of our roads, our bridges, even things like our dams, our airports, everything is tied partially to a tax that we pay on every gallon of gas that we buy. As cars have become more fuel efficient, we're using less gas, even though there are more cars on the road. Therefore, less money is going into our highway infrastructure budget as compared to the number of vehicles that are actually on the road and causing that damage to the roads and the highways and the bridges. So our infrastructure budget has not kept up with the automobile industry over the years. Big surprise there, right? The gas tax is not sufficient to keep our roads in a state of good repair. So today on this podcast, I wanted to go into the details about this because our government is struggling to find a way to resolve our infrastructure issue and to pay for the staggering amount of money that we need to spend on areas like roads and bridges and airports and dams and everything else. And they're looking at alternative ways of taxing us as drivers in order to try and pay for all that. So to understand the current situation, we really need to take a little bit of a history lesson and look back. The first incarnation of this gas tax actually dates back to the early 20th century when cars had just started to become affordable to the masses and people started driving, and we actually needed roads in the first place as opposed to just the dirt and cobblestone that the horses and carriages had been riding on. So Oregon kind of paved the way with a state gas tax back in 1919. And they kind of justified it by levying it as a necessary for the repair of the damage done to the highways by vehicles, machines, everything that was run by an engine that was traveling on the roads, and the need to build new roads to accommodate these vehicles. And, at the time that made total sense. By about 1925, 35 states were using such a tax, and the revenue from it was almost $80 million, which, now that doesn't sound like very much, but, back in 1925, that was a boatload of money, and the states were like, oh, we're getting money from this. We kind of like this. Let's keep doing it. And we also had an interesting byproduct that the tax allowed states to finally measure how much gasoline we were actually consuming, which is useful on a variety of economic scales and uses. So by 1932, every state had some version of a gas tax. And then our National Congress said, that's a good idea. They're always kind of behind the times on things, but they decided to implement a national tax. And that was defended as an emergency tax, trying to close the gap in the budget shortfall just overall for the federal government that was brought on by the Great Depression. So it was part of the 1932 Federal Revenue Act. That established the first federal gas tax among a ton of other different federal taxes. And it was established at 1 cent per gallon, which was a fairly significant amount back then. And in the first year, the federal tax alone raised almost $125 million. And even though it was supposed to just be an emergency measure to help us recover from the Great Depression, that kind of money was just a little too good for the government to give up. So they made that tax permanent during World War II, and they upped it to 2 cents a gallon by 1950. Then in 56, the Federal Highway Act raised that tax to 3 cents a gallon, and they used it to fund the newly created Highway Trust Fund. After World War II, one of the ways that we kind of re-kickstarted our economy was a dedication to building more roads, more bridges, more dams, more, power plants. This created a lot of new jobs, and this was one of the ways that they paid for that. Now, the tax has not increased since 1993. 1993, it was raised to 18.4 cents per gallon, and it has not gone up since then. It hasn't been adjusted for inflation, and that's one of the problems. But about 60% of the gas tax actually goes towards highway and bridge construction, maintenance and repairs on our roads, etc. And the remaining 40% goes to other types of earmarked programs within the federal government. But the problem is the revenues from these other tax programs, that are also used in the federal programs. State and local taxes are also assessed on each gallon of gas. In fact, actually about over 20% of the price that we currently pay for 1 gallon of gas anywhere in the United States is made up of those taxes. So in states like Pennsylvania and California, they have the highest state gas taxes. Pennsylvania charges almost 60 cents per gallon, and California charges over 55 cents a gallon. So that's why gas in those states is more expensive. On the flip side, Alaska, which produces so much of our gas in this country, despite their logistical challenges of transporting said gas around their beautiful state, they only charge 14.65 cents per gallon. And Missouri is the second lowest at 17.35 cents. So it varies pretty dramatically on our states, but the total amount of all these taxes, they're still not paying for everything that our roads and other infrastructure needs. And the gap in the budget is staggering. The federal gas taxes in 2016 raised $36.4 billion, and yet nowhere near enough to cover the cost of just maintaining our infrastructure. In fact, in 2010, which was the last time these numbers were published, gas taxes covered less than a third of our total spending on state and local highways in most states. Less than a third. Then you add in the federal dollars that get given to the states that come out of the federal portion of the gas tax and other taxes, you're still at less than 50% of what we need to cover just our current budgets for our state highways and roads and bridges, etc. That's not what we need to spend, but it's what we're currently spending, which is not enough because everything is falling apart. So even with toll roads, if in most states cover a very fraction, less than 5 to 10% of the transportation budget. Except in states like Delaware. Delaware tolls actually cover over 40% of their state's budget, but it's a teeny weeny little state. And I think every single road in the state of Delaware, it's a toll road. So that makes sense there. It's a weird state. But, the remainder of the budget that we are currently spending, has to pull from other tax programs. And yet our infrastructure is still in critical condition. The American Society of Civil Engineers does a review of all of our infrastructure, everything from our airport systems to the dams, the bridges, the power plants, even our schools. And they review this every 4 years. And the last report came out in 2017. And guess what? We got a grade D plus on our infrastructure. So yeah, we're just a fraction away from epic failure. And they estimate that the U.S. needs to spend $4.5 trillion by 2025 to improve the state of our roads, our bridges, dams, airports, everything. When you look at the numbers, it's really kind of scary. Our bridges are aging. we have over 600,000 bridges in the United States. 614,387 to be exact, and almost 250,000 of them are over 50 years old and have received minimal repairs and maintenance to them. The report estimates that it would cost us $123 billion just to fix our bridges. That's going to make me a little more nervous the next time I drive across a bridge. And our dams are literally crumbling. In 2016, more than 15,000 of the dams across the U.S. were flagged by the Society of Civil Engineers as being highly hazardous. So movies like San Andreas, where we saw the Hoover Dam go completely kablooey, is not outside the realm of possibility, and it has nothing to do with earthquakes. They're just wearing out. And as if we didn't know, our roads, of course, are in bad shape. All you got to do is drive around Charlotte to know that. But about 32% of urban roads and 14% of our rural roads are considered to be in really poor condition. In fact, there's $836 billion in backlog of unmet capital needed to fix the highways, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's just staggering. So the bottom line is our infrastructure is in deep doo-doo, and no one has a solid plan to figure out how to come up with this money to pay for the costs that we need. So one of the things our government is currently doing, and I'm going to keep politics out of this podcast like I normally try to do, but one of the things the government is currently considering is increasing the gas tax by as much as 25 cents per gallon to try and cover some of these costs. But here's why that's kind of an epically stupid idea, and really has been from the beginning, but way more so today than back in 1919 when Oregon thought this was a good idea. Gas usage, just despite what people think, gas usage really only has a tenuous link to actual, what I'm going to call highway consumption. And that is the wear and tear that cars, trucks, SUVs, commercial vehicles put on our roads. And that's a combination of the vehicle wear and tear as well as the quality of the materials that were used to build them in the first place, plus weather. And it varies obviously from state to state. We had a joke when I grew up partly in Wisconsin, and we had a joke up there that we only had 2 seasons, winter and road construction. And it's so true, because with all of the snow and ice that we got up there every winter, it destroyed the roads. So literally every summer, they were frantically trying to at least patch up all the roads to get ready for winter again, which would get destroyed again. So it was just kind of a nonstop maintenance cycle that we could never seem to get ahead of. So states that do experience more adverse weather and winter weather conditions, they have more wear and tear on their roads. States that have a lot more vehicles on the road, like California, states that have a lot of heavy equipment vehicles on the roads, those roads are going to take more wear and tear than states that don't. So maybe that's why Missouri has a lower tax, is because they don't really, have as many extreme conditions. I'm not really sure. But we need to figure this out. So increasing the gas tax is really not going to help anything. People don't drive the same amount. Some cars get more, fuel efficiency than others, yet the gas tax hits everybody the same. So, for poor people where gas and the price of gas is more critical to their budget and for getting to work, increasing that gas tax hurts them more than it hurts wealthier people who have a little more flexibility in their income. And, hiking up the price of gas a little bit, while it's going to piss them off, is not necessarily going to break their budget. For a lot of people, it will, as most of us have seen over the past 10 years with gas prices going up. It has a tremendous effect on the economy, because it's not just what we're paying out of our pockets at the pump. It goes to the cost of everything that we consume in our society. It drives up the cost of food, because food has to be transported. It drives up the cost of all of our consumable goods, because everything has to be transported. So it can have a really significant effect on the U.S. economy. And, given the tenuous situation that we're kind of in right now, I'm not sure that hiking up the federal gas tax is going to solve any problems, but it will certainly create a bunch more. So with that being said, governments are trying to figure out, both at the state and federal level, how do we fix this problem? How do we get revenue that is more fair to everybody, that really reflects the way we're using our roads and not necessarily the way that we're using gasoline? Because a hybrid or electric vehicle still puts wear and tear on the road. They just don't use as much gas. Therefore, they're not currently paying as much in gas taxes. So this is why we have kind of lumped together all these different programs that the government has been experimenting with under what I'm calling the Prius tax. And the current challenge is to figure out ways that we can implement such a tax, make it fair to whether you're rich or you're poor, or you live in an urban area, or you live in a rural area, or you drive a gas-powered or diesel-powered vehicle, or you drive an electrified vehicle, a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or full electric. So I'm going to take a really quick break, and when I come back, we're going to talk about some of the different strategies that the governments have been experimenting with and are already implementing in many cases that will affect not just hybrid and electric vehicle drivers, but potentially all of this. So I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Ah, the Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. Today we are talking about what I'm calling the Prius tax. How are we going to cover the budget deficit between what we're taking in revenue currently, for the most part, with a tax on gasoline that we're paying sometimes as high as 50 to 60 cents a gallon in some states, and yet it's not covering what we need to be spending to properly maintain our roads, highways, and bridges. So, since the gas tax isn't working, some states are looking at alternative methods of generating revenue, aka taxing us in order to pay for this. And this came up because a client of mine had seen some legislation that's being proposed in North Carolina. North Carolina is, like many states, right now taking what I'm calling kind of the quick and easy approach to try and increase revenues that they can then put towards our transportation budget. And I can vouch for the fact that we desperately need it because our roads in the Charlotte area completely suck. We have potholes that will rival some moon craters. So clearly, this is something that is needed, but exactly how we're going to solve that problem is still what is up in the air. And of course, since it involves taxes, is a little bit controversial. So what the North Carolina state legislature is talking about doing is simply increasing the registration fees for when you buy a hybrid or hybrid plug-in or electric vehicle. In every state, when you buy a car, new or used, you have to pay, obviously, the taxes to the state, and then you have to pay registration fees to register and title the car and get your license plate. Those fees vary dramatically from state to state, even from locality to locality. And in North Carolina, we are pretty lucky, North and South Carolina both. We pay relatively low taxes and registration and titling fees here because I buy cars for clients all over the country, and trust me, it's pretty darn cheap in the Carolinas. But they're talking about increasing that, actually doubling those fees for people that buy hybrid plug-in, and electric vehicles. And it's not just a flat fee for all of them. Typically, the states that have implemented this already, and there's already 20 states about that have implemented this, typically it's a stair step. So because hybrid and hybrid plug-in vehicles still use gasoline too, they're going to pay this extra fee, whereas electric vehicles, which don't use any gasoline, are going to pay the highest additional registration fees. So this, on the surface, this makes sense, right? Because those vehicles don't use as much gas, or in the case of pure electric vehicles like your Teslas, your Nissan Leaf, those don't use any gas, and yet they're still using the roads. They still put the wear and tear on the roads. So it's not fair that they're not paying for the infrastructure that they are using, right? Well, it gets a little more complicated than that, as most things do. First of all, the fees that the government collects from the extra registration on the hybrid and electric vehicles, part of that goes to the road budgets, but some of it also goes towards projects like increasing the number of public charging stations for electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles around the state, because you can't get people to buy those cars if the only place they can recharge them is at home, because then they're not going to be going very far. So increasing the number of public charging stations is actually a really good thing. And for people that are buying those vehicles, they should want to have those, and therefore they should pay to have those, because the rest of us that are still driving old gas-powered cars aren't going to use them. So again, that's starting to make sense. Right now, the states that have implemented this, the fees haven't yet shown a significant increase in the revenues, because the market for the hybrid and electric vehicles is still relatively small. It makes up about 3% of the overall U.S. car sales. Obviously, that's higher in states like California and out west, where they like to be a little more green, and they've been selling a lot of these vehicles for a lot longer. Even so, their increased costs, and believe me, in California, they pay an astronomical amount of tax and registration fees for all vehicles. But, this increased revenue is helping, but it's nowhere close to what we need. But our states know that the purchasing and use of these electrified vehicles, for lack of a better term, is increasing. And some manufacturers are predicting that by 2025, nearly 30% of their vehicle sales are going to be some form of electrified vehicle. So clearly this is the direction that the market is going, and the government is scrambling to try and keep up and even try and get ahead of it. Critics of the higher fees for your electrified cars, they claim that it penalizes the innovation and the efficiency, and will incent car buyers to avoid buying electrified cars in the first place, especially those that are buying hybrids, because they're still using gas, they're still paying part of the gas tax too, and now they're kind of getting hit from both sides. But keep in mind, a lot of those very verbal critics are actually lobbyists for the petroleum industry. They don't want us to buy electrified vehicles because they're losing money because they're not selling as much gas. So you kind of got to look under the covers and see, who's criticizing and why. But you also have to consider that these flat fees, they are not accounting for actual vehicle usage. It's just a flat fee. So, someone that is buying an electric vehicle that's actually doing quite a bit of driving is, going to get a bigger benefit. They're not going to be paying as much as, say, somebody who is buying an electric vehicle, but they only drive like 3,000 miles a year, like my mom does, because she's retired. Not that she has an electric vehicle, mind you, and never will. But I do know a lot of my retired clients that I work with, a lot of them are looking at hybrids and electrics because they don't drive that many miles. So they're not as worried about running out of electricity on their electric vehicles. So they're not going to be using the roads very much, and they're a little miffed about having to pay a higher fee for their electric vehicles. So, there's not a perfect solution here, but these fees on just the hybrid and electric vehicles, they also don't address the fact that regular gas-powered and diesel-powered vehicles that are powered by petroleum, they're getting a lot more fuel efficient. It's really amazing with the implementation over the last couple of years, even of the smaller displacement, your little 4-cylinder turbocharged engines. We're seeing a lot more fuel efficiency. There's dozens of regular gasoline powered cars on the market today that get, in the high 30s, even over 40 miles to the gallon just on gas. So the taxes on, or the higher fees just on the hybrid and electric vehicles, is not accounting for the fact that regular cars are not using as much gas anymore. So just charging the hybrid and electric folks, it's a short-term solution. It's the easiest solution for a lot of states to implement. So that's what they're going with, because, we'll always go with the path of least resistance, and we've got to do something even in the short term. But there are other more strategic methods that the states are starting to experiment with, and those are based on mileage. This makes sense, right? You're based or taxed based on the miles that you actually drive per year, whether your vehicle is using gas or not. It's probably the most fair system because it truly is based on road usage and how much wear and tear your vehicle is putting on the infrastructure. But again, it's not a perfect system. The mileage system can be a bigger burden on people who live in rural communities because they just have to drive farther to get anywhere. I mean, I can drive a half a mile and get to the grocery store or the Walmart, whereas some people in rural communities, they may have to drive, 5, 10, 15 miles to get to a store to buy the things that they need. So again, no system is perfect, but the biggest challenge really with these systems is, how do we implement them? What are the costs financially? What are the logistics of implementing them? And honestly, most importantly, what are the socio-political implications and challenges? Because that is truly driving most of the resistance and feet dragging for states that are looking to implement these systems. Basically, how does the government track how many miles you drive? And in doing that tracking, how are they not violating your privacy and creating a boatload of data security issues? Not surprisingly, California and Oregon are two states that have been leading the research into mileage-based revenue systems for over a decade now. After all, Oregon was the first to implement the gas tax back in 1919, so of course they're going to be the first to implement or at least try out a different system. They implemented a pilot program a few years ago that's limited to 5,000 cars, and those 5,000 car owners volunteered for this program. So what happens is those volunteers are charged 1.5 cents, so a penny and a half per mile that they drive, as measured by a device that has been added to their car. They are then refunded the amount of the gas tax that they pay at the pump because they track their gas usage as well. Now, they don't count any travel or gas purchases that they make out of state. It's strictly within the state of Oregon. Theoretically, the math should work out so that a driver with a car that gets about 20 miles to the gallon, which in this day and age is not difficult to meet that threshold, they would pay about the same in mileage fees as they would with gas tax fees. That's kind of the break-even point. So drivers with more fuel-efficient cars are going to pay more with the mileage tax, and arguably maybe they should because they're still using the roads just as much, than people that have gas guzzlers. Gas guzzlers would pay less on the mileage version. They pay more on the gas tax version. So this is kind of where the pendulum is. The good thing about the mileage-based systems is as cars continue to become more and more fuel efficient, and we continue to go to our alternative fuel technologies like electrified vehicles, this usage or mileage-based system is not going to fall short like the gas tax did. It will keep up because it doesn't matter how the vehicle is being powered. It only matters that the vehicle is driving on the roads. When we get to flying cars, there's going to be just a whole slew of other issues, but for now, we're going to assume that all the cars are going to stay firmly planted on the roads and use them. According to a report that recently came out that's been tracking this program in Oregon, the model is working. The system works, and the people that are using it have been very happy with it. So why are not more states jumping on this bandwagon? Why hasn't Oregon implemented it across the whole state? Well, people just don't want to do it. The people that volunteered for the Oregon program volunteered, which means that they were very open to this in the first place and either thought that it would benefit them, or they felt that because they were driving hybrid and electric cars, and there's a mix within that group, but typically most of the people that volunteered for that program do drive more fuel efficient or hybrid electric vehicles. They were just more socially responsible, I guess we could call it, that they wanted to participate in this because they recognize that the roads are still important to them and the breaking down of our roads affects them, and they know that they need to be paying their fair share since they're not paying it through the usage of gas. So these are people, they're happy with the program because they were more open to it in the first place. But there's, a bazillion people out there that really are not comfortable with this. They don't want to implement it. Whether it's, I don't want the government taxing me any more than I already am, or they're concerned about how is this going to be implemented? And that's really the sticker here. The biggest objection is not about the increased taxes. It is about the invasion of privacy. There's only so many ways that the government can accurately track how many miles that you drive. And there's therefore a trade-off between the cost and the ease of implementation of such a program, how well it works, the accuracy of it, and the cost to administrate it, as well as just how much of our privacy are we going to get invaded here? Obviously the cheapest and easiest with zero privacy invasion is self-reporting. And that's one system that they're looking at. Drivers would self-report their mileage every year, probably as a part of their annual vehicle registration. When they would go online or go into the DMV to renew their registration every year, they would simply have to tell them, this is my current odometer reading. Yeah, right. People are probably not all going to be honest. Sure, there's going to be a lot of honest people out there. There's probably going to be a bunch that aren't. So needless to say, this system is probably not going to gain a lot of traction from the government side. The next simplest system is the odometer check. Those of us, or those people, not me, because I live in South Carolina, we don't have state inspections here, but for the states that do have annual required safety and emissions inspections, they're already collecting your odometer reading. Somehow they're collecting it down here in South Carolina because my insurance agent actually increased my premiums because she said I was driving more miles than I thought I was going to, and I was on a discounted insurance program for that particular car. I'm not really sure how they got that data, and I'm a little scared to find out, but clearly somehow this data is being collected. So for states that are doing the state inspections, they're collecting that data anyway. So that would be a relatively easy way to do it and just apply a flat, whatever percent mileage tax that they would just send you a bill for in the mail, just like they do for your registration fees and in some states, personal property taxes. So that's probably going to be the easiest. For states that don't have an inspection program already in place, they could choose to implement a mandatory odometer check every year. So just like people with state inspections, they have to go to a certified state inspection station, which most mechanic shops in that state are. They have computer systems that they hook up, they do their inspection. Instead, your car dealerships and your repair shops would just become a certified odometer registration station. And every year you'd be required to go in and they would read your odometer reading, verify the accuracy, make sure it hadn't been rolled back, and then report that to the government. Granted, if states are going to do that, they might as well just implement safety inspections as well and, help us keep us a little bit safer on our roads. So this is most likely the system that could get implemented, at least in some states. The other systems, like the pilot program in Oregon, requires some sort of device to be installed in your vehicle that's going to track your mileage. It may track your fuel efficiency. For vehicles with GPS, it could track their GPS location. If the state wanted to implement a program that assessed a mileage fee depending on not just how many miles you were driving, but if you're in highly congested urban areas like downtown Atlanta or what Charlotte is becoming, and you're not driving a lot of miles, but you're spending a lot of time on the road and stop and go traffic, that actually puts more wear and tear on our roads, as well as smog, whatever else. Some states are talking about, well, could we charge more money for the people that are in highly congested areas versus the areas that, are more rural or don't have the congestion, as a part of trying to decrease the number of cars on the road and therefore decrease that congestion, because people are going to be penalized for driving their cars. And this would maybe incent them to take alternative transportation, take the train, bike into work, walk, just change that situation so that we're reducing our overall traffic congestion problems. So you can see how this is getting really, really complicated. And what kind of device are they going to use? It's easy to plug a device into your OBD2 port that cars after 1996 all have. Cars before that also have a port to talk to the computers. These devices are very easy to manufacture. There's tons of them already out there for different types of programs. But who's going to pay for that device if it's required? And, how do you feel about the government requiring a device be plugged into your car at all times that's essentially spying on your driving? I mean, I'm not so sure I want that in my car, not because I care about them tracking my mileage. I'm fine with that. But what data are they really going to collect, and how are they going to use it? Because it's not a difficult leap at all. It's actually a very small baby step towards tracking your speed and just mailing you a speeding ticket. I would be so screwed. So I don't know that I trust the government to collect only the data that they need for this program. And this is where other people also have a lot of reservations about this. Let's just assume that, they say they're only going to track a certain amount of data that only tracks your mileage. That's really simple. Okay, let's say for a second that I actually believe them. How is that data going to be transmitted? How is it going to be collected and processed? That stuff's going to get hacked, right? So there are just so many questions and no perfect solutions anywhere. So, would I go for a program if they did a voluntary program? Maybe, if they could really assure me that they're not going to track my speed that way. I only drive 8,000 miles a year. I drive a Mini Cooper S, which can be fuel efficient if I would not drive it like I actually drive it, hence the speeding tickets. But, I don't know if it would benefit me or not. I would probably say yes to the program just to collect the data myself and be able to do more podcasts about it. But I do recognize that we have a critical infrastructure problem, and we have to come up with some solution. And a mileage-based tax system is the least unfair. I'm not going to say most fair, but least unfair system. It's probably the best of all the evils that we can come up with that might actually start to work. But we've got a long way to go still to figure out how that's going to be implemented, and the technology of the cars and us as a market moving towards more fuel efficiency, reducing our dependence on gasoline. I'm sure that's going to progress much faster than our taxes are going to keep up to pay for it. So just some food for thought, folks, especially if you are looking at purchasing a hybrid or otherwise electrified type of vehicle. You may have to pay more at the registration, but you're also paying less at the pump. So folks, I hope this has been informative, if not maybe a little bit scary. But if you're looking to potentially purchase one of these more fuel efficient vehicles, go to my website, thecarchick.com, give me a call, and we'll talk through the details. But no matter what kind of vehicle you drive or how much you pay for it in taxes, please do so safely. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or the Car Chick.